Introducing the OA-1K Skyraider II, a modern powerhouse inspired by the principles that made the original A1 Skyraider legendary. Designed from the ground up to support special operations forces in austere environments, the OA-1K combines advanced surveillance capabilities with precision strike options. Its propeller-driven design maximizes maneuverability and allows it to loiter for extended periods, just like the original Skyraider, providing real-time intelligence and immediate fire support. Much like its predecessor, the OA-1K is built for versatility and lethality. Whether neutralizing threats, providing overwatch, or guiding missions with cutting-edge sensors, it stands ready to protect and empower special operations forces on land or in maritime environments. From the jungles of Vietnam to the battlefields of tomorrow, the warrior spirit of the A1 lives on in the OA-1K Skyraider II. Ready to answer the call. Any place, anytime, anywhere.
All right, today I've got Major John Bendokas with me today. As you just saw in that video, we're highlighting a new platform that's being fielded by Air Force Special Operations Command, or AFSOC. Major Bendokas, how you doing today, brother?
I'm great, Matt. How are you?
That's great. I'm excited to have you on. I'm excited to be able to talk about this thing. So let's start from the beginning, right? Like when we talk about a new platform, a new technology, all those things, like some of our listeners may have heard the Melissa Johnson episode talking acquisitions, technology, logistics. A lot of times that all has to start from a requirement. We don't just come out of nowhere and decide, hey, we're going to make this new thing. There's a reason and a why behind it, on the ground, in the air, for whatever tactical necessity, that we start looking for a solution. So the OA-1K Skyraider II fixed wing platform, what was the kind of why that generated this requirement and got us rolling on this?
Sure, Matt. So yeah, glad to be here. For Armed Overwatch, so the Armed Overwatch program, the origins you can really trace back to within the light attack program on the Air Force side, but a critical event that happened was on 4 October 2017, the Tongo Tongo ambush in Niger, where we lost 4 Special Forces operators: Staff Sergeant Wright, Staff Sergeant Johnson, Staff Sergeant Black, and then Sergeant Johnson. That particular ambush highlighted several discrepancies that this platform can't necessarily fix, but the sequence of those events highlighted a gap in ISR and close air support coverage for geographically isolated SOF teams or Special Operations Force teams. So on the light attack side, in September 2018 is when the SOCOM and AFSOC looked to build out the rapid fielding requirements document off of that light attack program. There was a memorandum that was signed between the SOCOM CG and the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, looking to use some of the funding from the light attack program to go toward a separate requirement for Armed Overwatch. So that transfer of money happened around December of 2019, which led into the whole requirements process that builds up to how we field new technologies. So in May 2020, we had our Special Operations Rapid Requirements document that was written. December of 2020 was what we call our Capabilities Development document, which is essentially the baseline document that highlights the threshold and objective requirements for that capability. So say there's a need, how we think the best way to go about that is. About 2 years later, or less than 2 years later, we had another rewrite of that, which folded in some of our Air National Guard brethren, so we could have a total force integration piece on the AFSOC side. And then in August of 2022 is when we had our source selection, which led us to the AT-802, the L3 Harris Sky Warden is their commercial name, which has been designated by the Air Force as the Skyraider II or the OA-1K.
Okay, so we're talking, light attack, geographically dispersed soft teams. If I'm listening from outside, you understand special operators are not only in armed theaters of combat. We've got special operations troops deployed around the world in all manner and all level of sort of active conflict, right? We've got folks when Afghanistan and Iraq were going on, there's a lot of assets in those theaters, and then there's a lot of other places that aren't as many assets. And so what's kind of the delineation between like light attack versus, I don't know, heavy attack, right? Like what's the differentiator there?
So I mean, one of the narratives that we've used over the years was looking at how we compare the way we've done counterterrorism, counter-violent extremist organization operations over the last 20 years of global war, and 20 plus years of global war on terror. So historically, when we would do soft type operations, we had what we referred to as the stack of aircraft, which was a dedicated stack of aircraft in the air of different capabilities: ISR, strike, bombers, you name it. Collectively, that stack adds up to a very expensive capability per flying hour. So what the OA-1K did was try to recognize that we are using very purpose-built design platforms to do these capabilities, whereas the Armed Overwatch platform, as it was called at the time, Armed Overwatch, before it was OA-1K, was designed to take pieces of those different capabilities. The intent is never to replace the stack. It's really just to what they call collapse the stack, essentially take smatterings of those capabilities, make them modular, and make a platform that's cost effective, multi-role essentially, to be able to do close air support, precision strike, and armed ISR with that modularity in mind. So, when you're comparing like a heavy attack versus a light attack, I mean, the light attack program was a totally separate program from what Armed Overwatch became. But what we've recognized and what you alluded to is that SOF is operating all over, across the spectrum of armed conflict. And in a previous, SOFcast episode, the previous ASD Solik, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations Low Intensity Conflict, Mr. Chris Mayer, was on. One of the things that he alluded to is that today's posturing, we're looking at a different priority than we were in that GWAT era. So, today we look at wargaming when we look at our largest competitors and our hardest challenges to correct. But what Mr. Mayer alluded to during that episode was that in wargaming, special operations is often an afterthought. And when you do that, what happens is you provide an unfair representation of what the conventional force does left of conflict, and you leave out the decisive role that SOF can play left of that threshold to either mitigate or prevent conflict from happening. So the platform itself, the Armed Overwatch platform, has our focus has evolved over the last 5 years since that since the first Special Operations Rapid Requirements document was written, and at that time we were more focused on CT and CVEO as a department, and now we are looking at a much broader aperture of how this platform can be used, whether it is in direct support of CT or CVEO, or we're in a location to bolster allies and partners. Whether we're preparing the operational environment for the joint force. There's applications that can leverage the unique access and placement of SOF authorities to garner maybe a strategic level effect from a tactical asset.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about the modularity. I'll go back real quick. Is just like that stack that Major Bendokas is talking about. In a previous episode in this season, we talked to an AFSOC JTAC, retired Chief Master Sergeant Rob Zachary. And if you listen to that episode, you heard him talking about being able to call for fire from multiple different platforms, all the way from, sort of a low flying aircraft that was giving direct armed overwatch, all the way up into larger bombers, right? And we look at that stack as just a layer of different aircrafts with different capabilities at different altitudes, that for a guy like me on the ground, we're happy to have different capabilities and different options depending on what we need. But a lot of times that full stack's not available when you're not in one of those sort of very supported theaters. Think the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and others, where there are a ton of aircraft in that area. And so this platform, as I understand it, is part of the goodness of it, to what you said, is to shrink the stack, take pieces and parts of the capabilities of some of those aircrafts that you would have in a larger stack, and be able to take some of that and take it into one aircraft. So for one mission, it might be take something off, put a different sensor pod on or put a different type of munition on. Is that kind of what we're driving at?
Absolutely. The platform is built with open mission system architecture in mind, and the ability to integrate a litany of either commercial off-the-shelf or government off-the-shelf solutions for technology, weapons, you name it. I mean, there's certainly a burden when it comes to having to do the integration and test, but our goal with designing the platform with the CDD thresholds, the capability development document thresholds, is making that burden as low as possible. So when we're not having to pay large investment dollars to modify an airframe, we're not buying a whole new airframe to have that technology. So if there's something that can be put into a pod or is in a pod today, how can we make it as adaptable and modular as possible? And there are thresholds in our CDD development document for how quick you're able to do that. But what I often brief when I'm giving, immersions in the program is that, imagine a platform that's supporting, uh, development of a village before an ODA goes there for a key leader engagement. So they're predominantly focused on an ISR type mission, where they're using their sensors, their cameras to be able to look at the environment. Maybe we have some sort of maybe a signals intelligence capability put onto the wing that we're able to collect on the village or get some sort of intelligence to inform that ground force commander. That aircraft lands, and the next one launches with maybe a weapons payload that's able to support close air support if things get a little spicy in the village, or if that ODA is looking to get into a firefight, we're at least backing them up with the means to be able to defend themselves and get out of there as appropriate. And even in between missions. So if we're operating with say 3 aircraft at a deployed location, we're able to maintain a positive handover of capability overhead a geographically isolated unit. Tying it all back to kind of that Tongo Tongo environment is if that package is assigned to a specific ODA on a given day, we're able to provide tailored capability and tailored support to them. And that mission, the mission statement that we originally kind of adopted from our CDD, was focused on providing a cost-effective, multi-role, rapidly deployable IW or irregular warfare platform capable of the 3 main mission sets: armed ISR, precision strike, and close air support.
Yeah, as a ground guy, you're always happy to have the eyes in the sky above you, whether it's an ISR or especially when you're in a sticky situation. It's always nice to have somebody up there who has a better vantage point of where the enemy is and hopefully can put some fire on them. We talk about geographic disbursement of SOF and all those things. In a lot of places that we go as SEALs or Green Berets or Rangers in different places, it's not the big, nice airfields a lot of times, right? So I know one of the things from this was creating a platform that could get into some of these locations it's not an international airport
Right.
that you have to fly into. Can you talk to me a little bit about the feasibility of getting it into some of these places?
Yeah. So, and there's certainly a lot of work to do. I saw it's just staff work right now, um, but the value proposition of this platform is that it is an agricultural aircraft. This is a militarized, armored, uh, weaponized agricultural aircraft that has a tail wheel, which gives it unique ability to land in relatively unimproved or less improved surfaces. So what I usually explain is that we deploy to a main operating base. That's our hub. If you use the hub and spoke technology, or you talk about MOB, FOB, and Austere, the main operating base generally has the sustainment and base operating support functions that do not have a burden on the specific flying unit that's assigned to fly the OA-1. It's already built in infrastructure. It's a place for our maintenance to have be able to do heavy maintenance functions such as repairs or engine overhauls or any of that type of regular recurring maintenance that happens with airframes. But from there, we can forward stage to a forward operating base. So we take our force or our organic team, which is built up of the crews, the commander, the medical troop, aircrew flight equipment, intel, tactical communications, munitions troops to be able to handle the weapons, and then our CLS, contract logistics support maintainers. We take that package and we we just rip it apart and we take, one or two aircraft with, one to four crews, let's say, to a forward operating base. There, we might take a small maintenance package of 2 to 4 people to be able to support light maintenance with a small flyaway maintenance kit. And a fob, think of something that doesn't have a lot of those support structures. They might have force protection for the fob. They might have some access to food, or at least water and MREs. And that there's a little bit more of a burden on the organic team with the aircraft to support themselves. And then take that even more forward. So as close as we can get to the X as possible, if it's co-located with a joint SOF team, being in an austere, what we like to call a primitive environment. The Air Force talks about agile combat employment, but agile combat employment to me implies that there's some sort of sustainment there. So when we talk about primitive operations, we're relying on our partnered team to be able to provide some support to us, whether it's force protection, but ultimately we don't want to be a burden to them. We don't want to cost them any more than what they're already affording themselves. So, we look at, how can we fly with our own, travel pod. So basically an empty pod that we put in our changes of underwear, toothbrushes, food, water, ammunition, whatever we need to sustain for a couple of days to support, that specific mission. And ultimately we'll rotate between the FOB and the austere location and all the way back, retrograde back to a main operating base. But being able to get as close to that team gives us much more time overhead to support them with that litany of capability that they might need.
Man, the pilots must be pissed. They have to leave their golf clubs at home on this one. No, I'm sorry. As an Army guy, I got to give you a little Air Force shot.
I think we need it though. I mean, there's definitely going to be a mindset shift that's required of our crews and the Air Force mindset that the training burden, I would say, is kind of we're unable to characterize kind of how far that can go. I mean, we certainly need to scope those limits, but some of the tasks that we're working on right now within the headquarters is how do we train our crews to be able to service the aircraft themselves? Like, I mean, imagine a pilot that's doing a level of maintenance similar to what a farmer is able to do on his ag aircraft out in Oklahoma. Yeah. Imagine the weapons systems officer or the backseater loading munitions with support of the pilot. And imagine we have our MUNS troops that might go forward, and we repurpose them as force protections so that we're not being a burden. I mean, there's multi-capable or so multi-capable airmen oftentimes are referred to on the Air Force side. It's something that we actually have to put to practice, and it's not combining like AFSCs. It's combining very different jobs, or AFSC is Air Force Specialty Code, similar to an MOS on the Army side. So how do we make very different skill sets capable? And then AFSOC has what they call mission sustainment teams, which are also kind of a similar mindset when you talk about tailorable force packaging of sustainment that could go out in those forward locations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk to me a little bit about kind of Lineage, right? Because this is a Skyraider II, right? And so what did you guys look at as you were creating this aircraft and looking at kind of what the role and capability of some of the austere things that the original Skyraider did? Was there a look at, hey, there's a specific reason you're calling it the Skyraider II? Can you talk to me about kind of that lineage?
Yeah, I can a little bit. I mean, I'd probably have to get you what we submitted to the headquarters Air Force for that. But as far as leveraging the name Skyraider, that aircraft was fielded. Kind of rewind a little bit. Is after World War II, we found ourselves the DoD posturing for a great power competition with the Soviet Union. And we were making investments that were prioritized more toward war with a near peer adversary at the time. That we found ourselves not really focusing or being prepared for police action in Korea or an insurgency in Vietnam. So we had the aircraft like the Skyraider or the A-26. That or the Dragonfly, different examples of aircraft during Korea and Vietnam that were absolute workhorses for at least surveying, forward air control, designating targets, and then being eyes in the sky for either ground forces or going forward of the FLOT to be the forward line of own troops to be able to identify where there's going to be some friction areas. Those aircraft were absolutely dependable, absolute workhorses. And then the designation of this platform, we OA is observation and attack 1, and then the kilo variant is just because we've had the variants of A or O1 throughout history. Since we landed on the OA-1K, we thought it was only natural to leverage the the history of the airframes themselves, but we also have 2 Medal of Honor recipients that flew the Skyraider during that time frame.
Yeah, very cool. So you said 2-person crew, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
You got a front and a back seat. Okay. As far as kind of getting those pilots and those weapons folks and everybody kind of ported over to this, what was the training kind of pipeline for pilots to be specifically? Is this an additional, is this additional training? Is this something that you're looking to have a pipeline for specifically to this aircraft? How's that kind of look in the Air Force right now?
Yeah. So the sources of our pilots it's a mix. So pilots and weapon systems officers, it's a similar story. So the Air Force Special Operations Command is divesting of 2 global war on terrorism heroes, the MC-12 and the U-28. So those 2 platforms, the MC-12 was primarily an Air National Guard platform, and the U-28 was primarily active duty with a small reserve component. But those 2 platforms are really what we refer to as the bathtubs for the aircrew. Those pilots and weapon systems officers will come in phase from the MC-12 squadrons and the U-28 squadrons to reorganize into OA-1K squadrons over time. The other way is we'll be accepting people from we call them pipeline students from undergraduate flying training, whether it's undergraduate pilot training or undergraduate CISO training. I believe in about 2 or 3 years, we'll start having them at the FTU. So between raising fresh blood to retraining kind of those MC-12 and U-28 crews into this mindset are our main 2 pools. But otherwise, as far as a formal training unit is concerned, it's not a whole lot different than how we train aircrew traditionally in Air Force Special Operations. There is a syllabus that you must adhere to. There's certainly a little bit of injection of mindset that we're trying to instill into that as well. The commander out there is a longtime U-28 pilot who's really trying to steer and put mindset up in the front of the mission, and train crews to be thinking about the ground force kind of at the forefront. But after that, the indoctrination in the squadron will be, they'll do a combat mission readiness top off, which essentially, peels off the formal academic kind of formal training unit smell of it, and then kind of puts you more into an operational squadron where you start doing exercises with the joint force and getting ready to deploy as a joint team.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And that's why I asked. I knew that there was some switch over, but I wasn't sure kind of timeline on kind of accepting, as you said, kind of fresh blood of folks that, there may be somebody listening to this right now that's like, hey, I'd be interested. And so timeline on that. How about timeline of fielding? Like if I'm out on the ground, I know that you as AFSOC just sort of started commissioning and getting the rollout of these. What's the kind of timeline look like if I'm a third group guy and I'm in Africa all the time or different places? What's the kind of timeline that you think folks might be, seeing this out in the wild?
Within the next 2 to 3 years, we should see this thing, out doing combat operations. Right now we're predominantly focused on training our test crews, getting our developmental and operational tests done, and then starting to train our operational crews. There's a big unknown in there. So developmental test and operational test, as with any system, discovers certain things about the platform that need to get changed, whether it's a feature that's not optimal for employment, or if there's certain software that needs to kind of be patched to be able to be operationally effective. So those things will be uncovered, and then the training is going to be iterative as well. We We took an approach on this platform through the acquisition side, and I'm not an acquisitions officer, but the acquirers, looked at how we could get this into the hands of our aircrew in the most efficient way possible. So we're accepting aircraft in increments of capability. So as those capabilities are certified and approved for aircrew to use, they'll get another top-off training to be able to use that next piece of hardware or software. But ultimately, the goal is to have that full-up capability prior to that first deployment, so that we're actually making a mark.
Sure. Yeah, you mentioned your background. How'd you get into this? Right? How did you get the rose pinned on you as the OA-1K expert to speak on it? What's your background on that?
Well, I'd like to, hopefully it's not a terrible series of decisions that led me to this, but I was enlisted for 9 years. I was a medic that worked on several joint teams in Afghanistan and Iraq as a combat advisor, and then I commissioned into become a combat systems officer. Out of combat systems officer training, I wanted to be as tied to the ground force that I once worked with as a member of those teams. So I was lucky enough to get my top choice of U-28, and I worked in the U-28 as a combat systems officer and weapons officer until I moved up to the headquarters. And I'm still technically a combat systems officer on U-28. I just fly a desk a lot more often than the U-28. But and I've been doing this role for about 2 years now up at the AFSOC headquarters.
Yeah, no, that's great. Obviously I'm asking questions from semi-inside, but really from the outside, right? And so is there anything else that you want to highlight about this aircraft that we haven't been able to touch on yet?
Yeah, I think with anything new,
Mhm.
especially when you talk about, Air Force-y type things or Air Force type people, there's going to be grief and there's going to be naysayers. One of our previous commanders used to talk about how change is grief, and you have to go through the 5 stages of grief to kind of get on board or not. You have to go through the 5 stages no matter what. But it's funny over the years that we've seen scrutiny from several external stakeholders. But I think ultimately what everybody's trying to do is make sure that we're being good stewards of taxpayer dollars, and we're fielding a capability that is cost effective, economically sustainable, and able to put America first and defend our homeland. But like one of the examples was, armed overwatch wasn't a doctrinally defined term until we got that scrutiny from the outside, and we said, well, shoot, we'll write some doctrine. So we, in Air Force doctrine 3TAC 05 for Air Force Special Operations, we wrote in a definition for armed overwatch, and we looked at, we wrote it as provides geographically isolated SOF personnel with an airborne precision strike and full motion video capability, paired with additional AFSOC core activities as dictated by mission requirements, combining elements of core missions of soft strike, air-to-ground integration, and ISR with the integrating mission of command and control. And with that, it gave us a platform to really kind of scope what armed overwatch means. And it's no longer the armed overwatch program. It's now the OA-1K program or the Skyraider II program. But it's funny that we've turned what the original name of the program from armed overwatch into a mission set that the aircraft does, and other aircraft within AFSOC do for the ground force. But the economical sustainability, one thing that's really important for people to remember is that we're not fielding niche capability to be used specifically for that mission. We're building a platform, and in my opinion, we should be fielding platforms that are modular, especially when we start talking about things that aren't purpose built to defeat our greatest adversaries. So, modular, open mission system architecture, adaptable to mission needs. It's kind of like when you talk about survival equipment, you never want to have just one purpose for that piece of equipment. You want to have multiple purposes. So, from that platform that was just a CT CVEO platform, we're showcasing and explaining that there is value proposition for this, like I said, across the spectrum of armed conflict, whether it's competing in competition, working with SecDef directed crisis and contingency response options, as well as war scenarios. There's a role for OA1 to be affecting and making those decisive and impactful change impacts for the joint force.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? One of the things that the military has always, struggled with, or at least gotten a bad rep for after major conflicts, is being tied to the last conflict, right? And because of the way the acquisition cycle and everything else, comes around, a lot of times it's, hey, we're still solving problems from the last conflict and not looking forward because we don't have a crystal ball and we're not sure exactly what it looks like. So I think the mindset makes total sense to me of like, hey, how can we make something as modular and adaptive and adaptable as possible, so that way, depending on all these different varying situations, whether it's as part of a stack, whether it's on its own, whether it's in a normal theater where it is highly supported, or whether it's somewhere austere, we've got a capability that we can kind of modify and make it happen. So makes a lot of sense there. One of the things that that was a little bit interesting about this is, there's a lot of conversation about remote or autonomous versus having physical, as you said, two folks, meet in the seat, so to say, in the aircraft. What was the decision criteria, and what's the benefit that this offers because you have, real humans up there flying it, looking down, being part of that operation that you talked about earlier?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are several cases that I've seen firsthand of the appreciation for having a human above the ground force to be able to be at least that voice is above you, and in a similar, maybe not a similar threat situation as you are, but they're there and they're responsive, and they're not going to lose connectivity with whatever controlling mechanism they have. They're there with you. I mean, there is certainly you mentioned the two aircrew. When you talk about the role that a lot of those other platforms may have had, like a U-28 or an MC-12, where you're taking, four member crews and you're boiling it down to two, there is a little bit of a increased workload on those air crews. So, one of the big efforts that we've taken from SOCOM's direction is looking at how do we automate those things, or how do we make the what I guess basically what does it look like if we had a fully autonomous and uncrewed OA1, and then let's back it up from there, and all of the stuff that's shy of not having a person and not having not having it fully automated is going to help the crew. So whether it's some sort of mission autonomy or flight deck autonomy, the things that we can do to take the focus out of flying the aircraft to the maximum extent possible and focus on the ground force of the task at hand are some of the things that we're looking at. But being responsive and being overhead, there's no replacement for that for a ground force. At least from my experiences as an aircrew member overhead ground forces, or having to use air power overhead when I was on the ground. There's just another level of comfort that wraps into that. It's certainly a nice to have, not a need to have in some situations, but having an affordable platform that's capable of doing that and having those tailorable capabilities, it really extends that value proposition of the Air Force being able to support ground SOF units.
Yeah, I think there's a role for both, right? And there's a need for both, and there's times and situations where either both can be effective or one or the other is more effective. So I think it makes sense back to, kind of the point before that of we've got to be ready as a global force. We've got to be ready for all manner of situations, right? And so the more adaptive, purpose-built aircrafts, purpose-built to being adaptive, I should say. So not just a one-trick pony, but can do multiple different things. I think there's options then as commanders, right? Depending on what you have in your theater, depending on what the mission is, there are different options available, which I think makes total sense because we are facing so many different variable situations across the globe as a special operations force. Well, as we kind of wrap up our time, what do you want to leave our listeners with as kind of parting words on this program and what they can see and what they should expect from it?
Yeah, I think the thing that I've learned the most with communicating with people within the AFSOC headquarters and within the Joint Force is we need to think differently, especially if we talk about a future conflict with an adversary that has measurable capability against our own nation. We need to not allow ourselves to think in a box. What I often explain a lot of times is SOF looks at where they are and where the target is, and they draw a line to that target, and they address the challenges of the things that might get in the way. They'll build out branch plans off of those. Mm-hmm. With conventional planning, the thing that I've run into a lot of times with some of the staff that's in the AFSOC staff is they're coming from career fields that are in the conventional side of the Air Force, that the conventional side oftentimes looks at the barrier first and doesn't necessarily look at the target. So what I have to do a lot of times, and what I hope the Joint Force can see, is that we're looking at where we are and where we need to go. So when these things sound exotic, they sound different. We're not trying to break the rules. We're not trying to be special necessarily. We're trying to find a way to win, and we don't want not being creative and not being outside the box keep us from winning.
Yeah, makes total sense. And I really appreciate you kind of expanding on it. I had seen the video. Obviously, we played it at the beginning of this, and had heard some things over kind of the end of my career in the SOCOM headquarters about armed overwatch and about some of this program, but really wasn't overly familiar, with kind of the nuts and bolts of it. So I really appreciate you joining us today, walking us through it a little bit. I know AFSOC's got some things on the website, some additional information and things like that, if anybody's listening and wants to check it out. And again, Major Bendokas, thanks for joining us on SOFcast, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode of SOFcast. No matter where you find our show, do us a favor, go give us a like, a follow, and share it with somebody in your network who might enjoy this episode. Also, please go give us a 5-star review. It really does help other people find the show. If there's someone else that you'd like to hear from or a topic you'd like to hear about, please shoot us an email, sofcast@socom.mil. And while you're at it, go check us out on social media at USSOCOM, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, X, LinkedIn, wherever. Follow along with what's going on with U.S. Special Operations Command and with the show. And on behalf of all of us from General Fenton on down at U.S. Special Operations Command, thanks for listening to another episode of SOFcast.